It is genuinely terrifying how quickly a person's understanding of property laws collapses when they are handed a VIP lanyard. At private cruise resorts, certain guests develop a severe spatial delusion, believing their premium package grants them legal ownership over the island, the staff, and sometimes the actual ocean. These are real accounts of boundary blindness that ended in global blacklists. 1. At a massive private island resort in the Bahamas, owned by one of the major American cruise lines, a 45-year-old passenger named Todd demonstrated how dangerous vocabulary can be in the wrong hands. Todd had purchased the standard all-inclusive island package, which entitled him to unlimited food, basic drinks, and a standard plastic lounger on the main beach. Have you ever noticed how the phrase all-inclusive acts like a linguistic skeleton key for a certain type of personality, convincing them that every locked door is simply a challenge to their consumer rights? About an hour after arriving on the island, Todd wandered away from the crowded public beach and discovered the resort's ultra-premium overwater cabanas, private air-conditioned bungalows perched on stilts over the ocean that cost an additional $500 a day to rent. Seeing that cabana number 6 was temporarily unoccupied, Todd waded waist-deep through the turquoise water, climbed the wooden ladder, and simply moved in. But Todd didn't just sit quietly and enjoy the stolen shade. He fully colonized the space. He unpacked a portable Bluetooth speaker, rearranged the heavy teak furniture to better face the ocean, and found the cabana's dedicated service tablet. Figuring that all-inclusive meant zero consequences, Todd began tapping the screen, ordering 6 shrimp cocktails, 2 bottles of premium champagne, and a complimentary fruit platter. When a resort attendant arrived carrying the massive silver tray, he noticed Todd sitting on the plush sofa, eating complimentary caviar from the mini-fridge. The attendant politely asked for Todd's name to verify the reservation. Todd refused to give it. Instead, he argued passionately that because he bought an all-inclusive wristband on the ship, the physical landmass of the entire island and everything built upon it was legally his to use. It is a textbook example of semantic entitlement, the belief that a marketing buzzword legally overrides property rights. When the attendant left to get a manager, the actual guests who had rented the cabana returned from a morning snorkeling excursion. They walked up the wooden pier, dripping wet, only to find Todd deadbolting the glass door from the inside. He actually held up his green standard tier wristband to the window like a protective talisman, motioning for the paying guests to go find their own cabana. He spent the next 40 minutes ignoring the resort manager's loud knocks, casually watching a wall-mounted television, adjusting the air conditioning thermostat, and aggressively eating the shrimp he had ordered. Security ultimately had to dispatch a maintenance worker with a master key to physically breach the sliding glass doors. At this point, Todd didn't apologize. He actually demanded a partial refund of his cruise fare because his inclusive relaxation had been violently interrupted by unauthorized personnel. He was escorted back to the ship on a private tenderboat, confined to his interior cabin for the remainder of the voyage, and permanently banned from ever setting foot on any resort owned by the corporate umbrella. 2. The swim-up bar is the absolute epicenter of resort-induced laziness, a place where people will happily tread water for an hour just to avoid walking 20 feet to a dry counter. A woman named Brenda arrived at the all-inclusive lagoon pool on a private resort island and immediately identified what she believed was a massive flaw in the unlimited drink system. The plastic cups were only 12 ounces. Instead of accepting the mild inconvenience of swimming back to the bartender for refills, Brenda waded into the water carrying a pristine, bright orange 5-gallon plastic bucket she had purchased at a hardware store before her vacation. She slammed the bucket onto the wet ceramic tiles of the bar and confidently requested 4 gallons of frozen piña colada, complete with a dark rum float. When the baffled bartender explained that they could not legally dispense industrial quantities of liquor into a gardening container, Brenda became fiercely defensive. She argued with absolute sincerity that, since her package was truly unlimited, a bucket was technically just a very large cup if a person was brave enough to drink from it. She then attempted to reach across the bar to grab the commercial blender herself, knocking a tray of garnishes into the chlorinated water. She was banned from the pool area entirely, forced to spend the rest of her all-inclusive resort day sitting on a hot bench near the tram station with her empty orange bucket. 3. High-end megaships have evolved to feature exclusive resorts within a resort, gated, keycard access VIP enclaves with their own private pools, butlers, and premium all-inclusive restaurants. A couple named Marcus and Julianne, who were booked in a standard Deck 4 interior room, spent 3 days obsessing over the locked glass doors of the VIP resort complex on Deck 16. It is a fascinating study in group dynamics. Put people in a tiered environment, and the human brain immediately becomes convinced that whatever is behind the locked door is mathematically essential to their survival. On Tuesday afternoon, Marcus managed to tailgate behind a distracted pool attendant, slipping through the glass doors and pulling Julianne in behind him. Once inside the exclusive luxury resort, they did not try to blend in. They immediately went to work. Realizing the private courtyard restaurant served unlimited high-end sushi and Wagyu beef sliders, Marcus devised a scheme to maximize their illicit infiltration. They secured a table near the glass railing that overlooked the standard public pool deck 2 stories below. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus and Julianne ordered an astonishing volume of food: 12 spicy tuna rolls, 8 sliders, and 6 plates of chilled shrimp. But they weren't eating it. Every time the waiter turned his back, Marcus would carefully pack the premium food into a set of collapsible silicone Tupperware containers he had hidden in Julianne's oversized beach bag. The sheer logistics of operating a clandestine seafood smuggling ring in the middle of a luxury resort requires a level of focus most people reserve for air traffic control. The escalation occurred when they realized they couldn't physically carry any more Tupperware. Marcus pulled out his phone, called his friends who were down on the crowded public deck, and initiated Phase 2. He tied a thick nylon cord to a heavy canvas laundry bag, loaded it with boxes of stolen premium sushi, and began slowly lowering it over the glass balcony of the VIP resort, down to his waiting friends below. They were essentially running a high-altitude food drop over a crowded swimming pool. The operation came to a spectacular end when a sudden gust of maritime wind caught the canvas bag, swinging it violently into a steel structural beam and showering a dozen unsuspecting passengers on the deck below with lukewarm spicy tuna and soy sauce. When the resort manager confronted Marcus, who was still holding the empty end of the nylon rope, you might expect a normal person to panic. Instead, Marcus stared the manager dead in the eye and claimed he was conducting an authorized quality assurance test of the balcony railing. But the story doesn't end there, because Marcus possessed a staggering level of audacity. While the manager was distracted calling security on his radio, Julianne quietly slipped away from the table, walked into the VIP locker room, and began furiously stuffing plush embroidered monogram robes into her beach bag, determined to extract every last ounce of value before they were officially caught. She managed to steal 4 heavy cotton robes and an entire decorative ceramic vase before security finally cornered them by the glass elevators. Even as they were being marched out of the enclave, Marcus loudly threatened to write a 1-star review about the structural integrity of the nylon ropes provided by the ship. The cruise line did not appreciate his dedication to safety or textiles. The entire group was confined to their lower-deck cabins for the remainder of the trip, disembarked at the next port, and handed lifetime bans from the line's entire fleet of floating resorts, leaving them to buy their own robes and sushi on land. 4. At a premium private island in the Caribbean, a 50-something passenger named Helen demonstrated how the concept of unlimited access can instantly turn a relaxed vacationer into a ruthless monopolist. The resort's all-inclusive beach package included complimentary use of thick blue foam floating mats. Most guests take one, float for an hour, and return it. Helen, however, decided that unlimited meant she was entitled to the island's entire buoyancy infrastructure. Arriving at the calm lagoon at 8 in the morning, Helen spent 2 hours systematically dragging 35 separate foam mats into the shallow water. Using a roll of heavy-duty waterproof duct tape she had specifically packed in her checked luggage for this exact purpose, she began taping the mats together edge to edge, constructing a massive, wobbly, 200-square-foot floating barge. This is the dark side of resort psychology. The moment a shared amenity is free, a certain type of guest will hoard it to the point of absurdity just to guarantee they have it. By noon, dozens of other passengers were complaining that the beach was entirely out of floats. When the resort's adult safety supervisor waded waist-deep into the water to gently ask Helen to dismantle her foam empire, she flatly refused. Sitting exactly in the center of her massive blue raft, completely surrounded by empty, unused mats, she confidently pointed at her VIP wristband. She argued that because she had paid for the inclusive water sports package, she had legally leased all 35 floats until sunset. When the supervisor attempted to untape one of the outer mats to give to a waiting guest, Helen stood up, grabbed a heavy plastic kayak paddle she had scavenged, and tried to aggressively punt her entire mega raft out into the deeper open ocean just to escape his jurisdiction. She lost her balance, fell entirely through a poorly taped seam in her own flooring, and had to be fished out by the safety team. Helen was permanently banned from the cruise line for hoarding, property damage, and attempting to establish a rogue floating micronation. 5. There is a very specific type of entitlement that occurs when a guest fundamentally misunderstands the concept of an all-inclusive beverage package and attempts to turn it into a high-stakes commodities market. On a luxury Mediterranean cruise featuring a private onboard resort complex, a solo traveler named Julian realized that his VIP tier gave him unlimited access to premium, sealed glass bottles of Fiji water. Most guests simply order one when they are thirsty. Julian, however, viewed his keycard as a license for industrial-scale distribution. I want you to consider the sheer amount of unpaid manual labor a person will willingly endure just to feel like they are outsmarting a corporation. On the third day of the sailing, the housekeeping staff noticed that Julian was refusing room service to clean his cabin. When they finally entered on day 5 to conduct a mandatory safety check, they discovered why. Julian had spent the entire cruise visiting every single bar, lounge, and poolside resort station, ordering exactly 2 bottles of premium water every 15 minutes. He had accumulated over 300 sealed bottles and meticulously stacked them against the walls of his cabin like a doomsday prepper. But he wasn't just hoarding them. Julian had carefully peeled the complimentary VIP stickers off the bottles and was sitting in the ship's massive glass-domed atrium, attempting to sell the warm water to passing guests who didn't have the premium package, demanding $5 cash per bottle. He even set up a cardboard sign he had made from a pizza box. When the hotel director confronted him about running an unauthorized, unlicensed beverage cartel out of the lobby, Julian calmly produced a printed Excel spreadsheet from his backpack. He argued that since his package was unlimited, he was legally allowed to act as a third-party vendor, and the cruise line was actually interfering with his small business revenue. He claimed his spreadsheet proved that by selling the water slightly below the bar's retail price, he was providing a vital public service to the ship's economy. The hotel director was absolutely baffled by the sheer corporate confidence of the argument. Julian was ordered to shut down his makeshift kiosk immediately, but he refused, attempting to aggressively hand a warm bottle of water to a passing elderly woman while shouting out a promotional discount code. He was physically escorted back to his water-filled cabin, confined there for the rest of the voyage, and handed a permanent lifetime ban for attempting to monetize basic hydration. 6. The absolute quickest way to earn a lifetime ban from a luxury floating resort is to fundamentally misunderstand how plumbing works on the open ocean. A woman named Barbara boarded a massive European vessel and immediately decided that the standard bathroom in her suite was insufficient for a person holding an all-inclusive VIP card. I genuinely wonder what goes through someone's head when they look at a highly engineered, self-contained vacuum toilet system and decide it requires their personal customization. On the third day of a Mediterranean sailing, Barbara called her dedicated room steward and demanded he fill her bathtub entirely with chilled, premium sparkling water, insisting the carbonation was necessary for her skin. When the steward politely refused to waste 60 bottles of expensive mineral water on a bathing ritual, Barbara took the initiative. She spent 3 hours systematically emptying the complimentary minibar, pouring dozens of small glass bottles of tonic, sparkling wine, and club soda into her tub. But that wasn't the violation. The violation occurred when she realized the bubbles were fading too quickly. To solve this, Barbara unpacked a commercial-grade, motorized aquarium aerator she had smuggled aboard, dropped the plastic hoses into the water, and plugged the heavy electrical unit directly into the shaver outlet located 3 inches above the splash zone. When the breaker naturally tripped, plunging half the deck into darkness, she didn't call maintenance. Instead, she marched out into the hallway in a wet bathrobe, found an open utility closet, and attempted to drag a heavy industrial floor-drying fan back into her flooded bathroom to speed up the process. Security intercepted her just as she was trying to wedge the giant yellow industrial fan through her cabin door. Barbara was permanently banned from the cruise line for severe safety violations and attempting to run an unauthorized, highly electrified hydrotherapy clinic in her stateroom. 7. There is a very specific type of chaos that occurs when a large group of friends pools their money for a premium VIP cabana on a private island. It acts as an amplifier for terrible ideas. A group of 6 men in their late 30s arrived at the secluded, high-end lagoon area of a Caribbean resort and immediately realized they were bored. Their all-inclusive package gave them an air-conditioned tent, a private shower, and a dedicated waiter, but it did not provide the one thing their unofficial leader, a man named Dave, felt they were owed: a private, exclusive swimming pool. Looking out at the calm ocean water, Dave devised a plan that required immense effort and zero logic. Using a dozen heavy canvas beach towels provided in their cabana, a massive coil of thick decorative nautical rope he found near the docks, and 4 large patio umbrellas, the men spent an hour wading in the shallow water, attempting to construct a physical, semi-submerged barrier in the ocean directly in front of their tent. They were essentially trying to dam the Caribbean Sea. You have to admire the raw, pointless dedication required to stand waist-deep in salt water, desperately trying to anchor a patio umbrella into the sand, while your friend ties heavy wet towels to it to keep other guests out of your designated swimming zone. When the resort's beach supervisor sprinted over and demanded they dismantle their highly unstable underwater fence, Dave became deeply defensive. He crossed his arms, pointed at the premium cabana behind him, and argued that since they had paid $3,000 for the day, they were legally entitled to curate their own aquatic perimeter, and the resort should be thanking them for improving the beach infrastructure. The argument escalated until Dave attempted to unroll a giant plastic tarp over their newly claimed section of the ocean. To truly understand the absurdity, you have to picture the sheer mechanics of their operation. While Dave was arguing with the supervisor, 2 of his friends were actively trying to weigh down the corners of their plastic tarp using stolen coconuts and heavy decorative river stones they had dug up from the luxury landscaping. They had effectively built a muddy swamp right in the middle of a pristine tropical paradise. But the true twist, the moment this evolved from a minor nuisance into a spectacular display of entitlement, happened 2 hours later when the tide naturally began to recede. Dave's heavily fortified, private pool slowly drained through the gaps in the towels, leaving the men sitting on plastic chairs in 3 inches of murky saltwater and wet sand. Instead of accepting the gravitational pull of the moon, Dave was absolutely furious. He marched up to the outdoor concierge desk, completely soaked and covered in wet sand, and demanded that the resort staff immediately deploy industrial hoses to pump fresh water from the island's limited reserves directly into his tarp-lined ocean crater. He argued that, since he paid for a waterfront cabana, the resort was contractually obligated to maintain the water level, regardless of tidal charts. When the manager flatly refused to manually refill the Atlantic Ocean, Dave threatened to sue the cruise line for false advertising and attempted to drag a heavy wooden lifeguard stand into the water to reinforce his failing dam. The entire group was immediately expelled from the island, permanently blacklisted from the cruise line, and forcefully reminded that all-inclusive packages do not include control over the Earth's natural tidal systems. 8. Sometimes a lifetime ban has nothing to do with noise or damage, and everything to do with a bizarre, stubborn refusal to accept the basic laws of physics. At a high-end, all-inclusive beach resort in Cozumel, reserved exclusively for cruise passengers, a 60-year-old man named Arthur decided that his premium wristband granted him immunity from the rotation of the Earth. Arthur had secured a complimentary beach lounger at exactly 9 in the morning, placing it perfectly under the shade of a large stationary palm tree. By noon, the sun had naturally moved across the sky, leaving Arthur entirely exposed to the direct heat. Instead of simply dragging his plastic chair 3 feet to the left, Arthur marched up to the outdoor concierge desk and demanded to see the property manager. He slammed his hand on the counter and stated that he had specifically requested a shaded environment when he booked his inclusive package, and the resort's failure to maintain the shadow over his exact coordinates was a breach of contract. When the manager calmly explained the concept of planetary movement, Arthur accused him of being lazy. Is it not fascinating how an entitled guest will completely reject scientific reality the moment it slightly inconveniences their vacation schedule? He did not ask for an umbrella. He demanded that the maintenance staff immediately retrieve a ladder and manually hold the palm fronds over his chair for the rest of the afternoon. When the staff naturally refused to act as human sundials, Arthur decided to protest. He dragged his heavy plastic lounger directly into the center of the resort's open-air buffet pavilion, wedged it between the carving station and the dessert bar, the only area with a solid roof, and lay down in his wet swim trunks right next to a tray of warm brownies. He spent 20 minutes aggressively refusing to move, declaring the buffet his new legally mandated shade zone and demanding waiters bring him plates of food while he lay horizontally. When security finally arrived to physically lift his lounger and carry him out of the dining area, Arthur demanded they compensate him for the solar damages he incurred while walking across the unshaded patio. He was removed from the property entirely, taken back to the ship, and banned from the resort network forever, purely because he expected luxury hospitality to override the solar system. 9. At exactly 3 in the afternoon on a massive private resort island in the Bahamas, a 40-something woman named Fiona decided that her black VIP priority lanyard was actually a deed of ownership for a 150-person motorized tender boat. The vessel was meant to shuttle guests back to the main cruise ship, and 50 sunburnt passengers were waiting in line on the wooden pier. Fiona bypassed the entire queue, boarded the completely empty boat, and sat dead center in the very first row. But she didn't just sit. She immediately placed her oversized designer beach bag on the seat to her left, stretched her legs across the center aisle, and calmly ordered the deckhand to cast off immediately. When the crew member politely explained that they had to load the other passengers before departing, Fiona tapped her black keycard against the fiberglass hull. She argued that priority access legally meant she had chartered a private maritime transfer, and she absolutely refused to share oxygen with people who had only purchased the basic drink package. To enforce her invisible barricade, she began aggressively spraying a misting bottle of expensive imported water at anyone who tried to step onto the boarding ramp. After 5 minutes of delaying a major maritime operation, 2 security officers simply picked up her entire plastic bench seat with her still sitting on it, carried her off the boat, and forced her to wait for the final cruise shuttle, banning her from all priority services permanently. 10. There is a fascinating psychological phenomenon that occurs in tiered resort environments. The best way to access a restricted area isn't to sneak in, but to act like you are the person in charge of guarding it. A couple named Gary and Susan booked the most basic, entry-level access pass for a private resort island in the Caribbean. However, Susan wanted to spend her day in the Elite Beach Club, a gated, key-card-only sanctuary featuring an infinity pool and premium padded loungers. Rather than paying the upgrade fee, Gary relied on the sheer, intimidating power of corporate confidence. He packed a plain white polo shirt, a generic silver whistle, and a heavy aluminum clipboard. At 10 in the morning, Gary and Susan casually tailgated behind a large group through the VIP glass gates. Once inside, Gary didn't try to hide in the background. He put on the white polo, clicked his pen, and began slowly pacing the perimeter of the infinity pool while Susan secured a premium daybed. For the next 3 hours, Gary operated as a rogue, self-appointed VIP enforcer. Whenever he saw a couple approach the best loungers, he would step in front of them, tap his clipboard, which was actually just holding a printed Sudoku puzzle, and sternly ask to see their digital reservations. Because people are socially conditioned to obey anyone holding office supplies and speaking with mild annoyance, the guests simply complied. If their wristbands were even slightly faded or turned backward, Gary would confidently inform them they were in violation of the club's capacity limits and point them toward the public beach. He successfully evicted 3 legitimate, paying couples just to ensure Susan had an unobstructed view of the ocean. The operation was flawless until Gary's ego overrode his survival instincts. When the actual VIP resort manager walked onto the pool deck to check the towel inventory, Gary didn't recognize him. In a spectacular display of misplaced authority, Gary marched up to the manager, blew his silver whistle, and demanded to see his staff identification badge, citing Unauthorized loitering in a premium zone. The manager stared at him in absolute silence, looked at Gary's cheap plastic clipboard, and then looked at Susan, who was aggressively waving for a waiter to bring her a mojito. When the manager called security, Gary didn't break character. He attempted to write the manager a written warning for insubordination. They were both escorted back to the ship, confined to their interior cabin, and permanently banned from the cruise line for impersonating resort management and illegally evicting paying guests. 11. At a sprawling private resort in Belize, a solo traveler named Brian demonstrated how the concept of inclusive amenities can completely break a person's understanding of communal property. The resort featured a dozen beautiful, hand-woven nautical rope hammocks strung between palm trees right on the water's edge. Brian arrived on the first tender boat at 8 in the morning and claimed the best hammock. However, by 10 o'clock, the tropical sun had shifted, and Brian decided it was entirely too hot. Instead of simply moving to a shaded lounger like a normal human being, Brian decided that his VIP wristband gave him the right to completely relocate the island's permanent infrastructure. He spent 20 minutes aggressively untying the heavy, complex marine knots, securing the massive hammock to the trees. Once free, he dragged the 50-pound web of thick rope across the sand, up the wooden stairs, and directly into the resort's air-conditioned, glass-enclosed luxury dining pavilion. Guests trying to eat their breakfast watched in absolute confusion as Brian attempted to string his sandy hammock between two decorative marble columns located directly above the hot waffle station. When the horrified maitre d' sprinted over to stop him, Brian became deeply offended. He pointed at his green wristband and argued that his package promised a customizable relaxation experience. And since he preferred to nap in 72-degree air conditioning while smelling maple syrup, the dining room was the only logical location. He was banned from the island for property tampering and attempting to turn a busy culinary venue into his personal bedroom. 12. The ultimate evolution of guest entitlement occurs when a high-net-worth individual completely loses the ability to differentiate between luxury hospitality staff and their own corporate employees. On a pristine private island in the Bahamas managed by a major cruise line, the most expensive daily rental was the Oasis Grand Cabana. For $2,500 a day, a guest received an overwater bungalow, unlimited premium catering, and a dedicated personal butler. A 62-year-old retired corporate attorney named Charles booked this cabana. But Charles did not arrive on the tender boat wearing swim trunks and holding sunscreen. He arrived wearing a full linen suit, carrying 2 heavy leather briefcases, and immediately turned his luxury vacation rental into an active, unauthorized legal clinic. When his dedicated cabana butler, a 22-year-old hospitality worker named Mateo, who was expecting to pour margaritas all day, arrived to introduce himself, Charles didn't ask for a drink. He handed Mateo a yellow legal pad and ordered him to sit at the teak dining table and begin taking rapid dictation for a 40-page appellate brief regarding a highly complex commercial real estate dispute back in Chicago. When Mateo politely explained that he was a food and beverage specialist and did not know shorthand, Charles berated him for poor administrative synergy and demanded the resort immediately dispatch a high-speed laser printer and a whiteboard to the beach. When the resort manager politely declined to turn a sandbar into a corporate office, Charles pivoted to an even more absurd strategy. He decided he needed to practice his litigation skills, which meant he required a mock jury. This is where the behavioral economics of the all-inclusive package truly spiraled out of control. Charles walked down to the crowded public beach and used his unlimited premium catering perk as bait. He recruited 8 completely random, heavily sunburned vacationers by promising them endless top-shelf tequila and chilled lobster tails if they simply came back to his cabana and listened to him talk for 2 hours. It worked flawlessly. By noon, Charles had arranged the plush cabana sectionals into a makeshift jury box. 8 strangers in wet swimsuits, drinking heavily from crystal glassware, sat in a row while Charles paced back and forth across the teak flooring, aggressively waving a laser pointer at a flip chart he had improvised out of taped-together resort menus. He delivered a blistering, hour-long closing argument about a zoning violation for a fence in Ohio. But here is the internal twist that elevated this from a bizarre annoyance to a spectacular disaster. Charles's strategy worked too well, The unlimited tequila did its job, and the random passengers got deeply, emotionally invested in the fake legal case. A massive argument broke out in the jury box between a retired math teacher and a young guy in a neon tank top over the credibility of an imaginary plaintiff. The debate quickly escalated from a polite disagreement into a deafening, aggressive shouting match that echoed across the entire VIP pier. The young guy stood on the expensive teak coffee table, aggressively pointing a half-empty margarita glass at Charles, screaming, "Objection! Hearsay!" at the top of his lungs, while the math teacher began loudly cross-examining a completely baffled cabana attendant who had just arrived with more towels. The other jurors formed furious factions, banging their heavy crystal glasses against the mahogany dining table like gavels and screaming over each other about property lines in a state none of them even lived in. The sheer volume of the argument completely destroyed the peaceful, meditative atmosphere of the luxury zone. The resort manager sprinted down the boardwalk to find a chaotic, red-faced shouting match happening over a completely fictional lawsuit. Instead of apologizing for inciting a massive verbal riot in a relaxation zone, Charles demanded the manager act as a bailiff, hold the passengers in contempt of court, and insisted the cruise line comp his entire $2,500 rental fee because his inclusive office space had been compromised by a hostile jury. Charles was escorted off the island by 3 security guards, stripped of his cruising privileges for life, and permanently disbarred from ever practicing imaginary law on a beach again. The connecting thread here is misplaced authority, people using extreme corporate confidence to mask complete absurdity. Who had the boldest fake authority? Gary evicting couples with a Sudoku puzzle, or Charles running a mock jury in his cabana? Let me know your verdict down below. If you appreciate unfiltered, documented stories that expose how weird we actually are, subscribe to the channel.